Dad, I want to be a daredevil.
Kids say such stupid things.
Hello, and welcome to the Simpsons Countdown, the podcast where we go back to the beginning and watch all of the Simpsons to trace the creative evolution of the series and count down, finding the exact moment in which it began its inevitable decline. I'm your host, Erix Antoine, and this week I'm joined by Petrus Silon, a Bolivian writer and musician and also a good friend of mine. We'll be discussing the episode Bart the Daredevil, which originally aired in the U.S. on December 6th, 1990. In this episode, the family attend a monster truck rally featuring famous daredevil Lance Murdoch, who, despite a horrific accident during the show, becomes an instant hero for Bart, who decides he wants to become a daredevil himself. He begins performing stunts on his skateboard. Despite attempts to discourage Bart, he presses on and becomes a bit of a celebrity among his friends. His big ambition then is to leap over Springfield Gorge. This leads to the now classic denouement, in which Homer finally dissuades Bart from doing so, only to end up flying over the gorge himself, providing the show with an unforgettably brutal punchline. It's arguably the first real classic episode of The Simpsons. Besides being Matt Groening's favorite, it shows up on all the critical lists and the fan lists, and there are valid reasons for that, starting with the fact that it's actually very good. And also, it feels like the quintessential Simpsons episode, the one that served as a bridge between the more grounded, quaint storytelling of the first dozen or so episodes and the more ambitious and esoteric experiments in comedy that would come to define the series. Petrus and I discussed that concept in full over the next half hour and change. So without further ado, here we go. Hey, so how you doing, Petrus? Welcome back.
I'm so glad to be here. It's been a while, and of course the circumstances have been kind of difficult, but I think here we are.
Yeah, here we are, thanks to the beauty of Skype. And we are still practicing social distancing, just so that our listeners know that we are concerned about that, and so we are still keeping healthy. Just so we're using Skype, even though we live in the same city and not too far from each other. We are using Skype, number one for convenience and number two for social distancing. So we're here to talk about Bart the Daredevil, a classic episode. I think arguably the first genuinely of the first 2 years of the Simpsons, like of the first two seasons, I think this is the first one where it's legit like a quote-unquote classic, like it's an episode that people remember. Because when people like look back on The Simpsons years later, they tend to look back on several episodes that are very classic, and you almost never see them bring up episodes from the first two seasons. There's one or two maybe, but in general, they tend to focus on later seasons. But this one always comes up, and even by the series, like the series referenced the episode several times as well. It's one that's like been maintained throughout like the run of the show as being sort of a key episode. And like I read somewhere that this is Matt Groening's personal favorite episode. So maybe that has something to do with it. But do you think there's more to it than that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more to it. I even read the writer's episode. I mean, Wallace Wolodarski said it was his favorite episode as well. So I think there's a reason. I think it's a turning point in terms of narrative structure and even the stuff they do. I mean, it's so wackier, and it's a turning point. They never went back to the first more naive the kind of stories they were telling. They never went back from that point, I think. And there's a reason for them referencing the episode, even in the movie, right? And even when they clone Homer in that Family Tree episode, and they fall into the gorge, right?
That's right.
I mean, you can even read into it, but I don't think it's a bad metaphor. But I think they leapt over this huge gorge, and there was no turn. There was no coming back, I think.
You know what? That's a very good point that you just brought up, because you know about that whole trope. The term they use for television shows, jumping the shark.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so like, and this is sort of the opposite of it. And maybe somebody could come up with a new term, because you have the terminology of jumping the shark, and the idea, of course, is that from the moment that happened, from that point on, the show became garbage, right? And so you apply it to everything. Oh, the jump the shark moment. So you have like the episode where it jumped the shark, and it became a stupid show from that point on, and then eventually it sucked and it got canceled, right? And the purpose of this podcast is to find the jump the shark, quote unquote, moment for The Simpsons. However, here, from what you're saying, we can look at this as jumping the gorge, right? You know, like the show became really good once it jumped the gorge. You know what I mean?
Also, the gorge is more like a leap into the abyss, you know? So
Yeah.
they knew they were trying to find new territory in terms of the stories they were trying to tell. So I think that's huge. But
Yes.
I mean, I'm not sure they were aware of the fact that they were going to like it so much, and the repercussions in their own storytelling were going to be so profound. But I do think they knew they were onto something.
I'm sure they were aware that they'd written a very clever script. And that is not to say that hadn't happened before, because, you know, even by this point, it was a critically acclaimed series that had several episodes that people had enjoyed. It's not like this is the first good episode of the show. That's not at all what we're saying, and that's also not at all what I think the point here is. But there was definitely this thing where you're right. Like, I had not, until you just mentioned it a few minutes ago, it had not occurred to me that, yes, one of the reasons why this episode resonates is because there was a kind of shift. Because over the past couple of weeks, I've been looking at looked at the first season, been looking at the second season, and there has been this feeling where, like, yeah, this is good. Obviously, this is, classic television, but we're yet to reach that point where here's where it's becoming really good. Here's where you go like, whoa. There's a couple of episodes, almost like back-to-back episodes that are kind of middling. Like you have like Dancing Homer, and you have like the one about the golf, the Dead Putting Society, and you have this, and you have the Bart Gets an F. I mean, not that these episodes are bad or anything, but they're not particularly special. And then finally you get to this one, which is a classic episode that is still considered a classic episode even today.
Yeah.
And and at the time it had this impact. So I do think that it was special. Like, I think at the time that it aired, people must have really seen something special in this in this episode.
But I also think, I mean, this you like Seinfeld, right?
Yes, of course.
The Chinese restaurant. There's this episode where they have to wait to get a table for the complete episode, right? I mean, the whole episode is just the characters waiting.
That's right. Yes. Yes, of course.
And they always used to talk about this episode in terms of it was a turning point for the show, in terms of what they could get away with, right? They always used to remember this episode in terms of why it was important. And I don't think it's one of the funniest. I don't love it that much, but I understand why it's important in terms of a moment when the creators realize they can get away with more stuff than they thought they could, right? So I think it also applies in this case, because the stuff that happens is, I don't know, it's over the top. It's crazy.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 10-year-old who's brave and bold. When he's not in class, he's risking his ass. The world's greatest daredevil, Bart Simpson.
It's Lance Murdoch, and based on Matt Murdoch is Daredevil, right? So the Marvel Comics superhero. Right. The reason he's called Murdoch is because of Daredevil.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Funny reference anyway. So Lance Murdoch falls into the pool after performing his stunt, his unbelievable stunt, and even the you throw a lion into the pool. That's just stupid.
Right.
It's not realistic at all. I mean, you have what else do you have? Sharks, and I mean, the sharks would eat the lion, right?
First of all, the lion would drown. The felines can't swim.
Of course.
As far as and then on top of that, as the lion is drowning, yeah, he'd be gobbled by the two sharks that are in there. Like I see what you're saying, and I don't even know.
But, I mean, more than cartoonish, I don't think it's cartoonish. I think it's sheer comedy, well constructed comedy. Like when Bart is becoming a daredevil, and he jumps over the car first, and then over the pool, and then over the dogs, and then over Homer. It's just perfectly structured comedy. It just works.
Yeah, and going back to what you were saying like a minute ago about how it's it's over the top, right? And how it's a turning point for the writers. I don't know at what stage of production it was made. I don't know when in the stage of their production this episode was written and then produced. It aired. It's number 8 of the season, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's number 8 in production order. It might not be. But you might have a point at that being the turning point, like when they as writers, because the writers' room, and they come up with the story, and then they write it, they have the table read, the way these things work, right? So after the table read, then they go and I think they record the dialogue first, and then they do the animation, whatever. The point is that it's possible that they realized, like you said, there's a turning point. I think that the writers must have said to themselves, hey, this is a little bit different than what we normally do. Because like at this point, even though there have been some ambitious episodes, it is still basically an animated sitcom, and it kind of follows a sitcom formula most of the time. But in this case, they really do tell an ambitious story that is kind of expansive. It's something that, I mean, and it wouldn't, obviously it's not the first time in the Simpsons case, but obviously no way that with the standards of the time, no way that an episode like this would ever be done in a live action television show, in a live action comedy show. Like there's just no way. Like there wouldn't be the budget for it. There wouldn't, like there's no way they'd be able to do it. So that's common for a lot of Simpsons episodes, but in this particular case, absolutely not. Just because it's so ambitious, there's so much going on. And then all these little gags that are not necessarily, because up until this point, I think we could say that The Simpsons is a relatively grounded show, and it still remains kind of grounded even after this. But when I say grounded, I mean it's relatively realistic. It has violence, it has things like that. Sometimes things happen, but everything that's happening happens within a realistic context. So it doesn't have like Looney Tunes violence, where like you have the coyote falling off a cliff and not actually dying and like getting up. And whereas in this show, if that were to happen to a character, because it's a grounded idea, the idea would be that person would die. So like, that's why. So it's still a relatively grounded show. But here they go all the way, because like you said, what happens to Lance Murdoch, he would have died, but he doesn't die. Right. Obviously, he just gets hospitalized. And then, of course, the classic punchline for the episode, the what happens at the end, Homer would be killed. There's no question of that. Like, obviously, of course, a person cannot survive what happens to Homer. Not only, a person can't survive falling once down a cliff like that, let alone twice, which is what happens.
They even find time for like a punchline.
You think you got guts? Try raising my kid.
The timing is perfect in terms of comedy. How it's structured it just works. Even and I think it must have been written early on, because the Dr. Hibbert's first appearance is on this episode. So I'm sure he's shown throughout the season. So I think they must have conceived it early on.
This little boy broke his leg trying to fly like Superman. It's a small price to pay for countless hours of top-notch entertainment.
At some point, they realized in order to create this perfect comedic vehicle, it doesn't have to be as grounded and as rooted in reality as I mean, we can get away with doing crazier, wackier things because it's animated. So you can have a character fall off a cliff and survive. In this case, it's not about that. It's just about the timing of the comedy, and it works.
Yeah, it works very well. I think, that gag, that's a perfect punchline. The whole thing, the whole structure of it. The fact that it's this emotional moment for Homer.
I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna make it. This is the greatest thrill of my life. I'm king of the world. Woohoo! Woohoo!
Here's the thing that the episode does really well is that it builds the story very, very well, and then it has it even builds to like an emotional climax, because the whole point is, I mean, you have Homer behaving like a real parent and try, and being concerned about Bart and wanting to stop him from doing this. And so it builds to this kind of emotional ending, where Homer manages to stop Bart from doing that, and they have that nice emotional moment. It's like, I love you, Dad, and all of that. And so it's nice. It has that nice little, let's say, the heartwarming ending of the episode. But then it says, but you know what? That's not where we're going to end. We're not a schmaltzy show. We are going to end on a gag. So don't worry about that. Okay, you got the message. It's very nice. You got the lump in your throat, whatever. But now we are going to end on a gag. Hold on. And then you have this gag, which and the way they build it, you almost
There's like three different gags.
Right, because it's like it's making fun of the emotional schmaltzy ending by having it switch into a gag of like, oh, he's trying to stop Bart and then he's just going to go down the cliff anyway. And then for a minute you think it's going to be that he makes it. You're going to be, oh, he made it, and whatever. But no, it's like, no, you know what? He's not going to make it, and that's going to be even funnier. It's such a climactic, inspirational moment. The whole thing of like Homer going, that shot is iconic. The shot of Homer going off, like over the gorge. The way the shot is constructed, it's like an overhead pan. It's very cinematic, and you just see him like flying across the screen. That's an iconic shot, which has been like, they've referenced it countless times, and like they referenced it in the movie. And you have that thing where you think he's going to make it, but of course it wouldn't be funny if he made it. What makes it funny is that he doesn't make it at the last moment.
What makes it perfect, and I think that he actually thinks he's going to make it, and it's the greatest day of his life.
Right, and then that obviously that's funny, and then you're kind of shocked by the fact that it's a Looney Tunes type gag, but it's accentuated by the fact that you see him graphically like falling down the cliff, bouncing off the rocks and getting all bloodied up, and then like the skateboard falls on his head. So it's like the same thing. It's funny, but it's also kind of like gross. But and then as he's being roped up by the helicopter, he's like on the gurney with the ropes, like he's being smashed against the side of the cliff as they're raising him up. But it's just a really sadistic. And then you have like the ambulance inexplicably, how would this even happen? It takes off and immediately slams into a tree. Like, what?
Also, this element of reality there, because it would be even more unrealistic if he made it. He's overweight. He doesn't skateboard. I mean, it'd be. So what they're saying is, no, you're not gonna make it because it wouldn't be real. You're falling off the freaking cliff, right? It wouldn't be realistic if he made it. So what really happens is he falls off, but he can't die because he's a protagonist. So just throw him off the cliff and screw it.
I do think, again, like going back to that whole concept of them kind of realizing, you know what, let's just take this as far as we want to take it. Like, who cares? This is a cartoon, and it's fine. We can do whatever we want. Let's just do whatever we want, and let's commit to taking this as far as we want to take it. It doesn't matter. Verisimilitude just goes out the window. It does not matter if it's realistic. It doesn't matter if we're obeying the laws of physics. It doesn't matter if we're obeying anything. Like, this is about being funny. And what is the funniest way we could end this episode? What would be funnier than this? So like just having that series of gags and the whole thing and committing to it. And I think, yeah, you're right. It is possible that at that point they were sitting there in the writer's room and they said, look what we did with this episode. I think we should just apply that same logic from now on. Let's just do whatever we want to do from now on. Like we're not going to care anymore about anything. Let's just like any wild idea we can come up with, we'll do it, and we'll commit to taking it to the extreme if we need to, and we won't care about anything else.
It's only if they need to, you know. I mean,
Right.
I think every episode has its own rules in a way, and in this case, the funniest way of ending it and the funniest way of telling this story was taken in all the way to Homer falling off a cliff. But you don't always have to do that. What I meant with the Seinfeld episode, having the characters wait for their table during the whole episode, they realized they could get away with that, and they realized they were opening a door in terms of narrative, in terms of structure, in terms of what you can make the characters do during the episode and not having a real plot. And in this case, they realized if the episode required a thing like that, they can make it happen because it's animation. It's not exactly, it should be emotionally grounded in reality, of course.
Yes.
But in terms of what may or may not happen physically to the characters, you can add a little magic, you know, if you will, and it's going to work just fine because it's animated. In terms of what you can do with an animated show as comedy, in terms of comedy writing, it was a turning point not just for The Simpsons, but for every show out there. You know, you couldn't possibly conceive the existence of a show like Rick and Morty if that sort of thinking didn't apply to it. You know, anything can happen in terms. I mean, everything is possible physically, as long as the characters are grounded emotionally and as long as it works comedically for the episode. I think that's it.
Mr. Murdoch, my brother is thinking about jumping Springfield Gorge on a skateboard.
Good for you, son. It's always good to see young people taking an interest in danger. Now, a lot of people are going to be telling you you're crazy, and maybe they're right. But the fact of the matter is, bones heal, chicks dig scars.
But Captain Murdoch!
Thanks, Lance.
You're welcome, little partner.
Because I want to bring it back to what you said about you compare it to Seinfeld, and I think that's very interesting that you bring up the Chinese restaurant episode of Seinfeld, which I think is it in the second season? Well, it's like in the second, it's early on. It's like in the second or third season. And, you know, many people will always, like anyone talking about Seinfeld, it's very similar to The Simpsons, where like the first season, you know, like people tend to not really, they ignore it. It's very short. I think it's only got like 7 or 8 episodes or something like that. And the second season, again, it's like growing pains. You know, it's still trying to sort of find its voice, its footing. But exactly. you have an episode like that, like the Chinese restaurant, which some people would refer to that as like the quintessential Seinfeld episode because it demonstrates what makes Seinfeld specifically different from most sitcoms.
Why it's a show about nothing.
Right. That whole concept where like that's what they would say, their branding. It's not really true. It's not that it's about nothing. It's about a lot of things, but the point is that it's not a formula show. It's not like, oh, it's about these, you know, it's just you can actually have an episode where it's 25 minutes of people standing in line waiting for a table, and that's all the episode is, period. Yeah. And nobody would do anything like that before that point, right? And at that point, Seinfeld, you look at that episode, and that's an example of what makes Seinfeld Seinfeld. And I guess in that same way, you're right. I think I would agree with you. I think you look at this one episode, and it was at that moment the quintessential Simpsons episode. It was the one that sort of heralded, this is what this show can really do. It's not necessarily the funniest episode, even of this season. And you know, it's not necessarily that. It is a very funny episode, and it's a very good episode.
I like it more than the Chinese restaurant in terms of funny. I think I understand why that Seinfeld episode is a turning point in terms of what they could get away with, but I think that Daredevil is just perfect. It works on many levels, and it works in terms of comedy. I really like it, and I do think it's really funny, but I also think that it's a turning point, and that's not always, it doesn't always happen in both cases. But in this case, I think it works on every level.
You know, like as you're going through the series, if you're watching it chronologically, like I've been doing,
Yeah.
and I think, you know, you always think, well, so which is the first really great one? And you get to Bart the Daredevil, and you go, you know what? I think it's this one, because it has all those elements, because it has everything that's good about The Simpsons up until that point, and then it pushes it just that little extra level further, where it hits all the notes where it wants to hit them. You know, so it combines. It has that element of, like, you know, it has the heartwarming part, the message, you know, that Bart wants to do this and he shouldn't be doing this. He shouldn't be taking the negative influence of Lance Murdoch and putting himself in danger. And, you know, it has that message. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, but we're not about that. We're about making you laugh. We're about giving you gags and trying to do that in a way that's funny. So it sort of balances that, you know, because you have a lot of episodes that they're not quite funny enough, or they're too schmaltzy. But here they really managed all the elements.
I won't jump anymore. I promise.
Oh, thank God. Thank God. Thank
I
God.
love you, Dad.
I love you too, son. You know, boy, I don't think I've ever felt as close to you as I do right. Huh?
So as we were saying, this is the first appearance of Dr. Hibbert. And maybe you're right. Maybe this did come relatively early in terms of the production schedule of it, like when they were writing it. Because I believe Dr. Hibbert was specifically created to be kind of a parody of Bill Cosby. And the thing is, because for the second season, they moved to Thursday nights in the US, which put them in direct competition with The Cosby Show. So it's almost like they knew that this would be the case, and they almost put that character in there as a wink, you know, as saying, like, yeah, look, here's, you know, you guys like Cosby? Well, we've got a Cosby. We've got Dr. Hibbert. He's our Bill Cosby, and here he is. I mean, they didn't go all the way. Harry Shearer doesn't do like a Bill Cosby impersonation when he did the voice.
I would like to talk to you about some of the things that you do in your show.
Because I don't know at what point it was decided that they would switch to Thursday nights. Animated shows take much longer to produce than live action shows. And so obviously it's a constant thing. So who knows at what stage this was. But since I know that Dr. Hibbert was created specifically to be a response to Bill Cosby in terms of the character, I think this episode was definitely produced after that decision was made. After they said, yeah, we're moving to Thursday nights. And they said, you know what, let's see where we can put in a character. Let's make a gag. Let's make a character that's sort of our parody of Bill Cosby.
During the season, does he show up a lot? I don't really know that.
A lot, no, but he does show up again. I mean, like, this is his first appearance, but he will turn up again this season in a couple of episodes. Not even just once. Like, he'll turn up in a couple of episodes, and over the coming episodes, he's going to show up several times. So obviously, when they created him, they said, we're going to have this character. They decided he would be a recurring character that would appear a lot, just like when they eventually we're going to have Lionel Hutz. He hasn't appeared yet, but he will. And then once he appears, then that's it. You know, he's going to show up all the time. So at this point, I think they were already being very clear about, in difference like the first season where they had some interesting quirky characters that showed up in one episode and then never again. Mm-hmm. Here, I think they were a little bit more aware that they could create. It's like they were becoming more aware of the fact that this could be bigger than just The Simpsons. They could move beyond just the family and start to really build a world. And so they began to think of, well, we're going to create these characters that are going to start turning up. You know, they looked into the first season, obviously, for certain interesting characters like Apu or whatever. And then, you know, here, beginning in the second season, they start to make more characters like that they're going to show up more and more. So obviously, when they created Dr. Hibbert, they knew it wasn't going to be a one-off. They must have known at that point, this guy will show up again. Like, he's here now, but we're going to use him again and again because we can. Like, why not? And the same thing with, like, Lionel Hutz eventually, and anybody else that starts to turn up. They'll be like, you know, we're building a world here. We're not just, we can tell stories that go beyond just the family. And they're really starting to see that in this season. So, like, here's where you start to see some supporting characters that are going to show up all the time. And that aren't even related to The Simpsons as a family, is what I mean. You know,
but I do like those two black characters they have early on, Dr. Hibbert and Carl, Or Lenny?
Carl.
Carl, right?
I think Carl.
They were good they're good black characters, I think, for the 90s.
They were doing their part, quote unquote, to try to make it feel like an authentic world, present some diversity. I mean, obviously these aren't main characters. You could argue that, but you're right. I mean, they were trying to present a diverse cast of characters in a way that felt realistic and, not like they weren't calling attention to it. They were just trying to make it an organic part of the world.
Yeah.
Which is the way to do it, in my opinion. Like, and you're building a diverse cast. It's important to do that because you want to reflect the real world, but also you don't want to bring attention to it.
These two black characters, I think they're perfect. Even as a Cosby parody, it just works, and I think I really like Dr. Hibbert. He's one of my favorite characters.
No, he's a great character. He is, and there's this feeling where you have he's a fully rounded character. Yeah, and he's funny and all that. So like it's interesting. You're seeing it in the season. As it's progressing, you're starting to see them start to bring these things out where they're building their supporting cast, they're building their world, and it's just interesting to see that as you observe the evolution of the series. It's just an interesting thing to keep track of. For me, it's interesting to keep track of. It goes back to that. I like that they were being pretty conscious about that, about saying, and we're going to have a diverse cast of characters. We're going to, because this has to reflect an authentic world, and we're going to do it in a way that feels organic. Now, you could argue that, well, yes, but also, you have your Indian character specifically be a convenience store clerk. We could get into a discussion, and you know what? I think eventually we will, because there will be episodes that focus on Apu, and I'm going to really want to talk about that at that time. But just in general, when they bring in characters, they're trying to do it in a way that doesn't call attention to it. Like the episode's not about that. In early in the season, you have in Simpson and Delilah, arguably they introduced the first gay character. Because at this point, Smithers, they weren't playing him as gay yet. Eventually they would expand on that. But in Simpson and Delilah, you have Carl, and Carl's gay, but it's not something that they really focus on. It's a detail of his character. He is, but it's not something that the episode's not about that. It's not about the fact that Carl's gay. It's not about that. He's just a gay character. And I appreciate when mainstream entertainment does things like that, because I think it's more effective. I think it's more respectful. I think it's better than just beating you over the head with, let me call attention to how diverse I am, or let me call attention to the fact that we're doing this. Then it feels artificial.
That happens even more nowadays because it just seems a little forced. It just seems like they're trying too hard, and sometimes you don't really have to make that character black or Asian or whatever. It just you can tell they're trying to please someone, and in this case, it just feels natural. And I just like this character. I just think he's one of the great characters in the show, and it's a nice first appearance.
Well, this was a great talk, man. I'm glad we did this.
I hope we can do it again, season 3.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to put some links to in the description and stuff to your to your Spotify and all that stuff, so people can check out your music. And and I want to thank you for joining me on this talk. And I'll definitely have you here during the second season.
It's always a pleasure, and it's always nice to have profound conversations on pop culture.
Yes. There's a lot to chew on. See you next time.
See you next time.
So that's it for this week's installment of The Simpsons Countdown. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this, please give us a like. If you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe. If you have a minute, a brief review might actually help boost the podcast's profile on whatever platform you're listening to it on, and if it isn't too much trouble, please do share this with all your friends, both virtual and actual, on social media. Your support by spreading the word is much appreciated. Be sure to look up Petrus's band Oz, so you can hear some very solid alternative rock from Bolivia, and I will be providing helpful links in the episode description so you can do that easily and comfortably. I'm Erix Antoine. I'll be back next Thursday evening to talk about Itchy and Scratchy and Marge, another classic episode about well-intentioned but nonetheless harmful censorship, which has turned out to be rather topical in these intense times we are living through at present. My dear friend Natalia Castro will be sitting down with me to talk about that, and I hope you'll join us. Until then, stay safe out there and continue observing your biosafety and social distancing protocols, because whether your area is opening up or not, we are not quite through this thing, and we need everyone to do their part, keeping themselves and everyone else healthy. And we'll get through this in due time. Thank you for listening. See you next week.
Well, after dinner last week, she invites me back to her apartment.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Well, it's this little place with this little bathroom. Shh.